Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Pynakker, and I am, what can I say? I'm excited about having my guest on today. You're a legend. You are one of the co-founders, some say the founder, but I don't know, of the Ex-Mormon Reddit. And I have to tell you, I have a long history with the Ex-Mormon Reddit. Now, of course, many of you who watch this program are faithful Latter-day Saints. But you have to understand that the ex-Mormon Reddit now has over 300,000 members, and many, many people are learning about Mormonism and the restoration by going to the ex-Mo Reddit. And I will tell you, I was one of those people for years. I first heard about the ex-Mormon Reddit on Mormon Stories with John DeLynn. And so almost every night before I'd go to bed, I'd hop on my laptop and just read. And I never signed up. I was always a lurker, and I just read and read and read and read. And so I want to welcome to the program. I honestly didn't know that I would be getting this guest on, and it's a privilege. Jason Echols, known as Chino Blanco, well, on Reddit. Welcome to the program, sir.
It's good to be here. I mean, right out of the gate, we're going to have to correct some lies.
Okay, let's do that.
Well, no, I definitely do not, because when we were talking about this presentation, I shot her over a one pager, and it kind of got condensed into a thing that really made it sound like I was somehow a co-founder of the Exmo subreddit. I mean, I'm just a power user more than anything. So
Okay,
I just want to clarify a little bit of the history.
sure.
Measure 76 is the guy who he's back now. It's been fun to see him come back. The way the moderator teams work, they're all volunteers, right? They're basically unpaid janitors. And so they come and go. And so he had started it, got the initial sort of ramped it up and then stepped away for a bit. He's back. And so Measure 76 is the founder. And then over the course, I'm just going to give a shout out to a user called Emma HS. Uh, she is just a powerhouse moderator who's been there for years and years and years and years. So, those are the folks that I sort of celebrate. In terms of how I got into that, though, there was a board called FLAC. Have you ever heard of Further Enlightened Knowledge?
I don't know if I'm
Because
familiar with that.
back in the day, before we had Reddit, they had these boards,
Uh-huh.
these discussion boards that were felt very, they have a 90s look to them. Now, if you look, they feel kind of creaky, right?
Mhm.
But it was very, DIY discussion board. And there's this one called FLAC, and they were hilarious. The contributors to that board were just, they're bright, quippy, funny people who I didn't know. But I just found that board during, I think it was during Prop 8, because
Oh,
I was out of the whole, I mean, I was out of Mormonism. I didn't think about it. I was living overseas. It had been a decade since, and then Prop 8 came along, and I'm like, it sucked me back in. And now I'm like connecting, and I found Flack, and there's just this really funny board. And after sort of settling in there, then that's when Measure 76 dropped an invitation at Flack saying, hey, do you want to come over and like be one of the founding mods of this Reddit thing?
and what year was this?
Oh gosh. Reddit's been around what, 14 years now? 15 years?
Okay, okay. So was that like really the beginning of Reddit then? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yeah, it was
Oh,
fairly early on. I mean, a lot of the, we could talk about why it worked. I mean, a lot of the success for the Exmo subreddit is tied to the rise of the platform itself, right? If you
yeah,
hop on a platform that's on an elevator up, all ships rise.
yeah.
So that was very, fortunate timing as far as that goes. But anyway, so that's my shout out to how that started.
Good.
And with Flack and with that board, that's also this panel at Sunstone.
Yes.
Uh, so there's a gal who she runs the group blog it's called Main Street Plaza, and that's the group blog that hosts the Brody Awards. And she's been doing this and the same thing. She's been doing the Brody Award for 15 years now, to little or no fanfare. But the people who follow this appreciate sort of that just every year she's compiling the best Exmo content from across all the platforms. Now you've got TikTok and YouTube and podcasts. She's just very diligent about every year sort of recognizing sort of the better content that's out there, and particularly some of the longer form content that tends to get overlooked.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what this Sunstone panel in a lot of ways is just, it's a chance for me and Shanson. She's based in Zurich. She's not going to be there, but she's going to zoom in. So, I mean, she lives over in Zurich now, but we've known each other for, yeah, 15, 16 years. Just it's sort of a reunion
Okay,
panel.
that's great. And actually that's I just want to I failed to mention this at the introduction that the reason you're coming on today, because you don't normally do the
I don't
podcast
do,
circuit at all,
yeah,
is that you are going to be giving a presentation later this week. So I'm going to be posting this episode right before Sunstone. And so
okay,
you can preview it. And so you're going to be giving your presentation at Sunstone this year, along with a panel discussion. And so that's the impetus. And you're going to talk about the history of the Ex-Mormon Reddit. And so I really think that so I would say I must have hopped on Reddit. I'm thinking maybe 10 years ago. It would have been whenever John DeLynn would have been talking about it on Mormon Stories. And so
right.
so I must and I didn't actually sign up for Reddit. I looked at my history until 2019. But I probably but I was reading it for years just as a, just as a lurker. And I have to say, during this time, of course, this is when I was an atheist, reading this through an atheist lens. And I was basically every night just going through and learning, keeping up with everything on the Ex-Mormon Reddit. It's now so fascinating. Of course, I've kind of come back into faith, and that's kind of part of my
Right.
story. But again, I'm not, I want to make it really clear to people because I know many people in the Ex-Mormon Reddit every time I say, sometimes I post something and I get attacked for being an evangelical sometimes. And it's like, you don't really know my story. I went to Aaron Ra, the atheist Aaron Ra, and had him on my program. And we did a call beforehand. And I said, I am a pro atheist evangelical. And his eyes got really big. And I explained to him, I said, listen, atheism was actually very helpful for me because for people who have suffered PTSD from religious abuse and spiritual abuse,
Mhm.
sometimes even the concept of God can be triggering to somebody, and they almost need to become an atheist for their own mental health. So for me, I will always be grateful for atheism because it was kind of my friend for a while. And so that I come with it from a completely different lens. So when I hop on the ex-Mormon Reddit or on the Mormon Reddit, I'm not saying, hey, I'm an evangelical and I'm trying to convert you to Christianity. It's like, no, I'm an evangelical who wants to have adult conversations with people. And
Mhm.
and I really feel that sometimes it gets a little nasty because it's anonymous. We all know that. But I want to say that the ex-Mormon Reddit and the Mormon Reddit and all the other stuff that's out there is really an important thing for people. Like that's like one of the first places people go to like investigate Mormonism, right? Or they're exiting the church and they have questions and they find themselves in the ex-Mormon Reddit.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the things with that particular community. There's so many ways it could have gone wrong. Like there's so many ways it could have like gone off the rails or not, not become what it is now. I always go back to that Sherlock Holmes thing and that story. I mean, growing up, it stuck with me. The dog that didn't bark. People love to talk about things that are happening, but they rarely think about things that didn't happen. And one thing that didn't happen is that it didn't fall apart. I mean, if you look at some of the other online forums, give it a few years, and there tends to be always some sort of like speed bump in the road where things kind of just fall apart. And that hasn't happened with this community. And I mean, I credit the mods for that. I
Okay.
sort of credit the model itself. I mean, if you look at what's happening on Twitter right now, it is just it's a wasteland. It's garbage, right? Like Twitter has become just so toxic, so useless as far as a place that, that people who are not into denigrating others and want to have, like you said, grown up conversations. It's not really a place for that anymore. It's a lot of, I think that's more Reddit. I don't know what your sense of it is, but I mean, it is so much better than it could be compared to most other subreddits, for
Mhm.
one. And then just in general, the moderation model for Reddit has been successful. It's kept all of these communities, slightly less toxic than you're going to find in other parts of the internet.
Well, you say you give credit to the moderators. What exactly is it that they're doing that you feel they're doing correctly that has kept it from falling apart?
Well, I think it's important that they're not celebrities.
Okay.
They're very much people who stay anonymous. They work in the background. I've, having moderated with them, behind the scenes for quite a few years. These are smart people and they're fair people and they're tough people because the internet's hard. You have to be kind of tough. And it doesn't matter if you're John Dehlin or Ryan McKnight or, Steve Benson or whoever you are, the rules have to be the same for everyone. And part of what drove, my enthusiasm for that platform was we are going to give a voice to people who basically are nobody in the, in sort of the larger scheme of things, but they're people whose thoughts and opinions and, experiences matter. And, as an Exmo back in the day, I would say even Sunstone was, sort of guilty of this as well. There's a lot of sort of casual denigration of ex-Mormons, some tittering and some, oh, these are not, Exmo narratives. They're just, they're rinse and repeat. There's nothing particularly insightful here, and I think we've made it much harder for people to take that tack where ex-Mormons are concerned, because we've created a platform where, look, it's not particularly toxic. It's you're hearing from real people with their experiences, and to dismiss them is a lot harder now because of the platform we've created. That was really that on my side. That was the enthusiasm, is like, hey, we're gonna have a place where people, the other thing is at that time on the internet, where would you find people who are trying to talk about things? Like in the comment section of the Trib, and or just it was dispersed everywhere, and there really wasn't a place for people to talk. And I mean, I don't want to drop names, but like Steve Benson over at the exmormon.org, the RFM board. I mean, that's where I saw some of their problems. They couldn't keep a leash on their celebrities. And so the celebrities would come in and do whatever they wanted, say whatever they wanted, denigrate, be rude to other users in the forum, and the mods wouldn't call them out. They'd say, "Oh, this is Steve's platform to be," because
Okay.
I'm not gonna speak for Steve or anything, but I'm an older guy who likes to have a drink, and you have a few drinks and you get online and you're in this place and people know who you are. You're a regular user, and you think you have liberty to be rude, and you've been on the receiving end of some of that from me.
Yeah.
Right? So you know how this works. But the thing is, the mods will not let me get away with things that go outside. If it goes above and beyond what's acceptable in the forum, they cut that crap down. And that's why I give them so much credit, because it doesn't matter who you are, they are going to, keep things on a level playing field. I mean, it goes, I remember years ago on a call with Joanna Brooks, and because Joanna always had this funny thing, this is back during the if you remember the Mormon moment, I think it was like 2012,
Yes. Oh, yeah. With Mitt Romney. Yeah.
right, with Rami and everything that was happening, it sort of provided a platform for her to do the work that she can do so well. Yeah. So I mean, it was a great year for Joanna Brooks to be Joanna Brooks, quippy, smart, insightful, blah, 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 all of that. But and the joke though was, hey, never read the comments. As someone who's writing, trying to write serious, journalism about Mormonism during this moment, you never want to get into the comments. It's the same thing with Jana Reese. If you get under a Jana Reese column on her platform where she publishes and you read what people are saying, it's gross. It's just rude, drive-by, garbage. And so like the joke is, for anyone who's trying to write longer form, more interesting, insightful stuff, you got to stay away from the comments. Well, except where are all of the non-famous, non-hyper literate, well-spoken people going to hang out? That's what I think. To me, the Ex-Mormon subreddit was like, hey, here's a place where everybody, they don't have to have great writing chops. They don't have to be known. They don't have to be influencers. They don't have any of this stuff. Normal people can get on anonymously and talk about their experience. And it gives them one place to do that all together rather than being spread out all over the internet. That's been there's my rah-rah for the Exmo subreddit. I think it gives average folks a chance to share, thoughts and experiences without feeling like they have to prove anything to anyone.
It's so interesting because honestly, I remember when we had a little bit of a spat, and I said, let's hop on Zoom. And this is the thing, like it's interesting because in one sense, I hate to use the word celebrity, but I'm a known person in this
Right,
community, right?
right.
And I always get frustrated when people will like do these drive-by attacks on me. And I'm not saying yours was a drive-by attack, but well, a drive-by attack is somebody's driving by and they
Yeah,
attack you and they drive away, right?
yeah,
And so I always just say, hey, let's I don't know who you are. You're anonymous. You know who I am.
yeah,
Let's be on a even playing field. let me send you a Zoom link and have a conversation. You're the only person that has ever taken me up on that, taken that Zoom call. And that's why I feel like it's so cowardly in many cases when people attack and then they don't have any intention, like, because, and I
Right.
remember um meeting somebody at one of my meetups last year who's on Reddit, and he's like, I was like, it's so great to actually meet a person like you and him at the meetup. And then you realize these are real people. And I don't, honestly, I don't really take it personally, because I also know that people, look, I don't want to come across as, hey, I'm this evangelical Christian who's going to go into the ex-Mormon Reddit and start preaching the gospel and trying to save them. That's like,
Well,
that
I don't
that's
want to
not
put you
going to
on the
fly.
spot. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I
Okay.
can give you a little bit of sort of context
Yeah,
for what's going on. And it's not personal. And that's what, it's not personal. It's really, it goes back to what I was talking about. I don't think whether it's the Mormon subreddit or the ex-Mormon subreddit, we're very aware and nervous about those forums becoming platforms for content creators.
absolutely. I
And it
completely
has to
understand
happen.
that.
And when that content does come to the fore on those platforms, it needs to feel kind of organic.
I agree.
And you're not, just to tell you, you're in good company. Because I mean, I'll tell you what, I'm a fan of Bill Real, right?
Hmm.
But I had to kind of send him a note and say, dude, you can't just pop up and be like, hey, Bill Real here with my latest thing, because it feels so promotional. And
I
it
get
also
that.
feels like it established a hierarchy between, I'm here, I'm a known celebrity creating this, content. You're my audience, and I'm going to speak to you as if you're my audience. When you're in those forums, whoever you are talking on peer-to-peer level with that audience. There is no, it's the same thing with Mormons. If you talk about Sunstone, like one of the things that drives me nuts about like Mormon studies in general, right? There's rampant credentialism. Everybody's comparing credentials and putting each other, trying to figure out where the hierarchies are, and it's like, we want none of that. Anyone who's like involved in a Reddit subreddit is not somebody who's like a fan of hierarchical conversations. And that's why I'm not, throwing shade at Bill. I'm just saying, stylistically, I would hope he'd be aware that when he comes into a conversation in that forum, keep everything, you know,
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And and this is the thing. I just want to kind of explain. So when I first started this channel, I was not even on Facebook. The only place I was actually active at was Reddit. And so when I first started, I actually contacted the mods and said, listen, I'm starting up this YouTube channel. And I asked permission. I always, whenever I join a Reddit, I always ask permission to post before I ever post something. I won't, and then I was given permission, which is fine. Now, and 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 I don't actually, I've learned that there's this dance that we're having. Like, I recognize, like, okay, I'm not doing this to do self-promotion. I'm actually doing, but I understand why people would think that. Okay, I get that. I'm having conversations that I think are really worthy of being posted in these forums, because I think
right.
I'm trying to have conversations that start conversations on Reddit. That's what I'd like to. That's really what that's always been my intention.
Yeah.
And so, and after a while, but also I've cut way back on posting on Reddit, because I also want to be respectful. And if people send me a note or say, okay, I'm like, okay, fine. I'm not here to promote. I'm here to start a conversation. So I might post in the Ex-Mormon Reddit maybe once a month, if that now. But I feel like, okay, this is a good episode that I think would really resonate in
Right.
that community. I'm posting it there, and that's the
And I, and I,
context
and
now.
I think the cadence matters.
Yeah.
That cadence matters. I will tell you just, and I hate to drop names, but I don't do this very often, so I'm just going to speak freely. I mean, back in the era that you may remember, like when you were first on the Exmo subreddit, I mean, when it really started to take off, it also kind of dovetailed with Mormon leaks
Uh-huh.
and Ryan McKnight and all of that. But I will tell you that there was some tension, because the mods are like, you have to follow the rules that we have in place here. It doesn't matter if you're Mormon leaks or who you are. We don't dox people. We don't bring outside drama. For example, if you have a breaking news story that sort of outs someone as a player in some kind of scandal or controversy, right? You don't originate that in our forum. If you can refer to an outside news article or there's something going on, but these guys, Ryan and his crew, I mean, what they were doing, really fun stuff in terms of, I mean, I love the whole, Julian Assange type thing that they were trying to do. But the Ex-Mormon Sub-Reddit was not their platform. It didn't belong to them. And they needed to follow those rules. And I think there was some, some of the same tension that happened like with me and you, just like, hey, this is what this platform was intended to do. And you could do a bit of what you're doing and bring it here. But if you bring things that feel like it's constant promotion, or if it feels like you're trying to dox people, reveal identities and break rules that don't conform to Reddit rules generally, you're gonna be out of here,
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why I like the forum, because it has, over the years, every time we get one of these like, oh, kind of cool projects like Ryan's, there's always this moderating position of the mods at Exmo, or like, we're not going to let this go beyond what's allowable for any other users.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no
No,
allowances there.
and
And
that's
that's
fair.
John's the same. I mean, I love John Delan, right? But he knows if he started to have a cadence of posting his own content every week, it would, you know, the mods would be like, hey, love the content, but we're all grown-ups. Let's be grown-ups about this. You're also operating a business. And it's
Mm.
not our job. It's not our job to provide a free platform for your business. Even though we love your business, we love the business that you're in, which is in the business of telling these Mormon stories, but we are not, that's not our job as volunteers. Literally, the folks behind the scenes at the Expo Server, unpaid for 15 years, dealing with all kinds of things just to keep it on this even keel. And part of keeping it on that keel is making sure the cadence from content creators doesn't get out of hand.
Yeah, no, I get that. I
So
get
I'm just
that.
being honest with you, man. Like
Yeah, no,
this,
and I,
everybody, John doesn't get an exception. Ryan doesn't get nobody gets an exception. And that's why I love Emma HS, because she is fair and tough about making these judgment calls of what do we have to do to make sure this thing doesn't go off the rails. And then we're treating our audience with respect. That's the other thing. We have to treat our users with respect. Respect the fact that their voices, their posts, their contributions count as much as mine.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
should show up and say, oh, I've been in this subreddit for 15 years. My post should somehow always go to the top. No, the stuff that goes to the top is the stuff that's worthy, that the audience enjoys. There are tons of posts that I put up, 5 votes, 10, nobody cares, right? It's like, oh, this is not interesting to the community. That's how it should be.
Hmm.
It should
Yeah.
be an environment where, wannabe influencers, wannabe content creators, it's an opportunity to fail. And it's an opportunity to get some nice hits, and it's just the audience reception is going to determine that. So,
Okay.
right,
Okay.
that's my spiel. That's my big spiel for.
Yeah, I'm actually just curious how frequently do you post on Reddit?
Well, I mean, part of the thing is, I've been doing it so long, just quite frank. Okay, I'm in my professional life, I'm a copywriter. Okay, I read extremely quickly, and I can power through a lot of written content very quickly. And I know where to find it now. I mean, after you do it for a few years, it's like, oh, I know where all the blogs are. I know where all I know where the reporting is getting done. I know where these stories are going to pop up. And it's literally just, and it, you know, fairly quickly, you go through 15 or 20 places every day and say, is there anything interesting there? And as soon as you see something that looks interesting, I mean, like, what's the guy's name? Terry Roger, the BYU studies editor who just recently retired. I tend to post quite a bit of his stuff, because, and it's this odd, like, really not aesthetically pleasing blog that looks like it's from the 90s, but he's posting some really trenchant thoughts after a career at BYU. And so I'll pop in there every month and say, hey, does he have a new post? Because he's got some really thoughtful stuff going on. Exponent 2, I will tell you, Exponent 2 has, to my mind, in the last few years, it is a great, exmo feminist blog. The writing now is just, there's a lot of really good writing. And in my world, I'm a nerd. The panel we have at Sunstone, you're talking about people are fairly, writerly, readerly, nerdy kinds of people, right? Longer form people. Exponent 2 has been knocking it out of the park, so I know to go there. There's just, if you know where all the little, it's a rabbit hunt or a treasure,
Yeah.
yeah, and you know where everything's at, and so it's pretty quick to get there and find it. And if you read, you know, Main Street Plaza with the Brodies, what Shansen does, she has like she'll end up at, every year you've got 30 to 50 of like the best of the best content that's linked to these content creators that she does this thing. Well, it's very reflective of kind of how all of us in that world operate. We keep these lists of like, oh, that was a great piece of content. Oh, that was a really interesting article. It's just that's sort of the mindset. I have a comp lit degree, man. I spent my world. I should have been I was on a track to be a professor. I mean, I'm a guy who in my undergrad years was just reading, right? Just tons and tons of reading. And so that's where, the world isn't that world anymore. It's this, it's this
Yeah.
kind of engagement, it's the book thing. That's why Sunstone, we have a vendor table and it's an invitation. Chanson has, she calls it the Mormon Alumni Association. And it's, oh, look at that.
Oh,
I do
that's
have,
great.
how to use
Congratulations.
technology. So anyway, it's called the Mormon Alumni Association, and she's basically curating just a selection of titles that she would recommend to, literary exmo types who just want to read, some really nice exmo authored titles.
Sure.
And I love that because nobody's drawing attention to that longer in this world, right?
I know, I have to totally resonate with that because originally, honestly, I got one of my inspirations for this channel was there's this YouTuber had LDS book reviews and he
Uh-huh.
had about 200 subscribers. And I was like, wow, I think I'm going to start a channel called Mormon Book Reviews. And maybe I'll get a couple hundred subscribers.
Uh-huh.
And I'm just going to be this niche channel where I review books.
Yeah.
And that's what it was intentionally that was what it meant to be. And then maybe maybe I'll interview some of the authors, right?
Uh-huh.
So when I first started the channel, the first author I interviewed was actually Christopher Thomas, who wrote a Pentecost series of the Book of Mormon. The second author I interviewed was Matt Harris. But not
Oh,
too
wow.
not too bad of a
Yeah,
start.
no.
Yeah.
See, that's yeah.
And it's funny because um, I had like 20 or 30 subscribers and on the channel, and next thing you know, I'm talking to John DeLynn
Yeah.
on Reddit.
Yeah.
And him and I are having a conversation. I got on his radar screen very early on.
Uh-huh.
And but one of the things that when I say it resonates is I would do these book reviews and I'd script it out, I'd do all this work, and admittedly it was kind of just looked like hostage videos at the first start. But and then the second season of book reviews, we actually did 4K, green screen,
Uh,
graphics, all this fancy stuff. I only have two book review views, I think, that have over 1,000 views. People are interested in this stuff, the interviews. And
well,
so
but that's
it
okay. So
evolved
that's
into,
but you talk about like why would I hop on a Zoom call with you regardless of our little like,
yeah,
back and forth on Reddit and all this, This is because you're doing a thing called Mormon Bookery. I mean, in in
yeah,
in 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 our world, it's like the guy who's willing to actually put content out there talking about a book,
yep,
getting other people to like, even if you got 1,000, maybe you've got 3 or 4 or 5 people somewhere who pick up this book because of you.
yes,
To me, that's a win.
it is. Yep.
It's a win. I mean, for me, so before the internet, I mean, this is how it worked back in my world before the internet, right? I thought, did you live in New York for a bit?
No, I've never been to New York, actually.
Oh, okay, so I went to school in Manhattan. So I went to school in New
Oh,
York, right? And, as a kid, a Mormon kid, actually from a rural background, a more plus the Mormon BYU background, landing there and getting into the city, of course, it's this amazingly fun time in my life, this period, right? The thing I loved about New York was all the you'd walk around the neighborhood and there'd be tables out with secondhand books, and people would be sitting around just offloading their libraries on the sidewalk in the city, and you would get to just browse through these titles and go home with a book. Dude, see, and that's the world that I loved that world. I loved walking around a city where there were secondhand books for sale everywhere on the street, and so you doing this thing with MBR, I mean, that's just,
I
we got to
appreciate
keep
that.
representing our folks who are, doing the work.
Well, back in the day when I lived up in Chicago, I used to go to Printers Row Book Fair every year. And that's kind of a taste of that. I always loved going to that and found some great books there too, by the way, throughout the years. And I love books. I really do. And the sad thing is since I've started this channel, I don't have the time to read the books that I used to. And but I tell people, I said, the best way to finish a book, and there's like, what's that? I said, schedule an interview with the author of the book, and then you're going to read the book. And so
To do you got to do your research. I mean, that's, yeah.
yep. Yeah,
And that's what I always
exactly.
respected with like John's approach too. And any Lindsay, any of these folks, these content creators, you can tell they knew they had to read the book
Yes.
to do the interview, and they've done the work. And that's just, to me, that's modeling behavior. Like, hey, this is,
Hmm. I totally agree with that. And that's actually what many authors even told me. It's like, man, I've been on other programs, but you're the only one that actually read the book.
you
You
want to hear
know?
the tragedy for my life? Just getting
Sure.
personal.
Yeah.
Because I'm noticing like the bookshelf, the class, you have the bookshelf behind you, right? Man, traveling most of your life and keeping any kind of personal library do not mix. That's my wife and I have owned libraries in so many countries, and every time we move, it's like you never ship, they never make it, outside of your neighborhood. It's like it all gets farmed out right there. Anyway, sorry, that's just I'm jealous of anyone, you know.
Well,
I'm 56, so I still got another decade or so before I need to think about like actually getting back to having my collection. We'll see.
well, just to give you perspective, I used to have a big book collection, and all I had room for was this shelf right here. And this shelf was in my apartment in Hammond,
Uh-huh.
Indiana. And this was all that was all Mormon stuff. That's the extent of my original collection. These two
Uh-huh.
bookshelves that you see behind me are basically books that have been sent to me by publishers and authors. I haven't paid for most of these. I got for free, and I had to buy these two. I probably spent more money on the bookshelves than
You
on
had to
these
buy the
books.
bookshelf to house the
Yeah,
freebies you were getting.
and so it's great because like the only book that I've had to pay for recently was Oxford's edition of Richard Bushman's latest book. They're very stingy, but then next thing you know, freaking Oxford sends me Matthew Harris's book, so they must have changed their policy. But
Uh,
because typically Oxford is very stingy about giving out readers copies or free copies. But for the most part, man, University of Illinois Press will just send me books unsolicited, and that's just great. And even Rick Bennett of Gospel Tangents went to me and says, "Man, I still have to pay for my books when I have authors." I said, "Well, Rick, it helps to have book in the name of your title of your podcast."
nice. Did you see the schedule at Sunstone this year? I mean, because you mentioned Matt Harris, and I'm thinking about a lot of other people that are just like folks that I need to read their
Yeah,
books, and it's
yeah.
like prodding me to like. But the program this year is freaking amazing.
I just,
Sorry, Dan. I'm looking at the roll call of the folks who are showing up, and
yeah,
Leia and Dan and all these. Oh my gosh, it's going to be a fun 3 days. I'm sorry, I'm just doing a plug for the schedule that's there. I
oh
will have,
yeah,
and I just want to be completely upfront. I've only been to, this is only my third Sunstone. I'm
okay,
not a Sunstoner. My first one was as an undergrad at BYU. And my only, and I freaking went to an Orson Scott Card panel. You know. But I'm completely wet behind the ears undergrad at BYU. Completely, I'm very much, not knowing what Sunstone was, just wandering up there. So there was that one. Then let's see here. There was the panel with then there was sort of the Dan Witherspoon era.
right.
I forget like where what was going on I think it was 2012 that we did the panel. So that was my second time there, was doing that one. I just want to, what I'm trying to in a circuitous way get to is, I really like the Sunstone that we have now.
Uh-huh.
What Lindsay's turned it into, to me, is what that's it's just cool. It's fun.
Yeah, well, this would have been my third Sunstone, if I didn't fall into my health condition, and I always go for free because I get to umpire the kickball game
Oh,
between Team Outer Darkness, the Exmos, and Team Higher Law, the polygamists. And so I don't know if they're going to be doing the kickball tournament this year. I heard a rumor that was canceled, I think, and I I I I just feel terrible not able to go because yeah, I have to tell you, folks, there are many people who live in Utah who've never heard of Sunstone or have never been to it. And I have to tell you, I don't care where you're at, whether you're an Exmo, and you'll see church employees there. Yeah, there's evangelicals there, you have LGBTQ people. I jokingly like to refer to Sunstone as a little bit as kind of like where Burning Man meets Mormonism. It's just kind of this great
yeah.
kind of anarchy of ideas and all this crazy stuff going on. You'll have fundamentalists giving a presentation in one room, and then you'll have a stripper giving a presentation in the next
Oh,
room, that
I
kind
mean,
of stuff.
that's the anecdote from my first Sunstone that I actually mentioned it to my mom, just because she's a music teacher. And my very first Sunstone as a naive undergrad, I pop up there, and I bump into my music theory professor at BYU, and I love this guy, I loved his class. Um, and it was just so funny. He was just very quickly like, "Hey, good to see you. You didn't see me. I didn't see you." And that was my memory of that. And so that, and of course, I love anything that has a hint of subversiveness is attractive. So that was fun. So hey, all right.
So I want to just ask you because well, first of all, actually, just why don't we do this? Why don't you preview a little bit about what you're going to be talking about at the at Sunstone? Maybe just give us a little taste,
Well,
a
yeah,
nugget.
I mean, it was initially going to be more of a presentation from my end. We've got an hour, which is not a lot of time, to be honest. It was
Right.
going to be a presentation from my end. And then we ended up getting a bunch of guests.
Oh,
So I can tell you, I mean, and just talking with these folks, like we have an hour and we have like 7 panelists now.
yeah,
So
yeah.
we all basically get about 5 minutes to talk about whatever it is we want to talk about. And then because I would like the second half to be us just having this kind of banter that you and I are having now, because I'll tell you who's going to be there. Okay, I'll just throw some names out there. Okay, I really like in the Mormon subreddit. Have you noticed a guy named Strong Attorney or like
Yes.
the? Okay, that's Colby Reddish. Sorry,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's Colby Reddish. And this is not. I'm not doxing anybody. I mean, that's Colby, and the guy's been in the last couple of years. I really love his voice. What he brings into the conversation in the Mormon subreddit is really on point for our aspirations for that subreddit. I mean, I think you can tell that Mormon subreddit is kind of the old timers wanting to maintain the feel of the original Exmo subreddit, where it's a little more academic, it's a little more, informed, you know. I love the Exmo subreddit, but that's an experiential, hey, you just had this experience with your bishop yesterday, here's my selfie, or here's what's going on. It's more of that, whereas the Mormon subreddit for me was more of getting back to the original Exmo subreddit of, man, these are folks who they know more about Mormon apologetics than they've forgotten more about Mormon history and Mormon apologetics than I'll ever know, because that's not my wheelhouse. But these guys, they know it. I mean, there's guys hanging out in the Mormon subreddit who are just amazing in terms of that. And Colby brings a very strong voice to that subreddit. So he's going to be there. You might know this person. I don't know. Rebecca Biblioteca?
Oh, yeah. Of course,
That
she's
ring a
my.
bell?
I was the one that discovered her. She's the very first co-host job
Oh,
she
you're
ever had
taking
was
on
on
that.
my
There you
channel.
shots fired. You're
Yeah.
okay. Really? She owes it all to you, Steve? Is that
Not all of it. She's talented in her own way, but she I just joined their little reading group, their book club before I started the channel, and then her
yeah,
and I became, well, last year we hosted that big movie screening in Salt Lake City.
yeah.
Um, and her and I did it. We went from being nobody knew who we were to packing out a house in Utah. So yeah, it's a great story. Rebecca's and I's journey is our kind of parallel. So Rebecca's going to be there. That's great.
Rebecca's going to be there. Colby's going to be there. So, because I was trying to kind of cover sort of the platforms in a way,
Mhm.
So we've got Colby, we've got Rebecca. Manya Baker is a really one of the newer writers at the Main Street Plaza blog that I mentioned. And she's going to be there and help us sort of tell that story along with Carol Hamer. Okay, man, you got to help me with the pronunciation here. And she's going to hate me for saying this. It's John Hamer's sister.
Oh yeah, I'd say Hamer's. Yeah, Hamer's.
Did I get it right?
Yep, yep. Mhm.
It's funny because you're online together for 15 years and you
Right.
never have these, face-to-face live conversations. And I'm like, good grief, it never even occurred to me to think about how to pronounce somebody's name. But in any case, no, so Carol's going to be there virtually. Manya's going to be there as part of that blogging crew for Main Street Plaza. And then we've got, I don't know if you've heard of this character, White Cat Prophecy.
That sounds familiar. I think yeah, yeah.
So White Cat Prophecy was this really snarky Twitter
Okay.
presence. And the whole Twitter thing is just like a foreign country to me. Like I don't get it. It's not um, but White Cat Prophecy like pretty much was like the classroom, clown for the whole Exmo Twitter thing for the last year or so. And
Hmm.
just really quippy and hilarious to follow along. So got White Cat Prophecy. I'm not going to say his name. Um, so that's sort of our Twitter representation. I wanted to get Jesse Jensen, who's post Mormoni on IG, or TikTok. No, TikTok is like was sort of her native platform. She's one of those, hey, when TikTok came along, that was a huge thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what happened when TikTok came along? All of a sudden, all of these Exmo women had a platform to like do some really amazing content. I mean, that's one of the things I wanted. And when I talk, I'm going to be talking about, it's not just Reddit, it's about how all these platforms sort of evolved over the year. And it's all this sort of like shifting landscape. And I'm trying to remember how many years back, is it 5 or 6 years back now that TikTok sort of came onto the scene?
That's about right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And all of a sudden we're seeing, and I'm not going to try to, sorry to do this, but YouTube was kind of like, the Exmo priesthood. And you've got like these guys doing these sort of like very scripted, constructed, things, and it's polished and it's beautiful and all that.
Right.
All of a sudden, TikTok comes along and you got these Exmo gals doing this content. It's freaking hilarious. And it's spot on. And so Jesse has like, dozens at this point of these sort of scripted TikTok routines, sketches that she's done. And I reached out to her and I said, Jesse, I'm your huge on Reddit. I'm always like posting her stuff. I'm your biggest fan. And she's like, yeah, but I don't do unscripted. Sorry, she's like, I don't do unscripted. I like the scripted stuff. And I said, I get it. That's fine. So, but my presentation is probably going to be just me just hitting play and saying, here's a couple of TikToks that amuse me to no end. And then so we've got so that's gonna be part of it. I'm there. Manya's there kind of to rep Carol Hamer, Shanson, the sort of the blogging group thing. I'm there kind of to rep, you know, what Jesse's done and just kind of talk about that. Um, gosh, I'm trying to think. Oh, there's a character named Ascended Scuba. Have you ever
Okay.
seen his stuff in the Mormon subreddit?
All these names, I know the names. I can't attach it
So
to,
Ascended, and he was like, first he was Grand Scuba, then he was Ascended Scuba. I had no idea who this guy was, but he was just writing this really sort of like deep dive, uh, super intricate analyses of Mormon, phenomena. Like he's really into like, oh wait, where does the Mormon sort of like I don't know if you know Hofstadter's piece, from what Harper's in the 60s about the paranoid style in American
oh
politics.
yeah, oh absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
just a classic, right? Just like
Yeah.
that's, if you're talking about cultural, literacy, you got to know Hofstadter's piece about, the paranoid style. Well, this guy leans into it in terms of the Mormon take. And I grew up, I was born in Mesa, Arizona. I grew up with the Skousen,
Right.
John Birch, all of this. That was the lens through which you saw the world. And then next door, the neighbors were the Udalls. And so and the Udalls were this opposite example of how to be Mormon and how to be engaged in politics and in the country in an informed sort of, rational way. So I'm growing up with crazy in my little world. And then I see the Udalls and the other, examples of, oh, you can be from the West in the Intermountain West, be fairly libertarian in your views, but not be freaking insane, and and understand words like stewardship and, taking some responsibility for the world we live in as opposed to this conspiratorial Bensonite John Bircher weird stuff that I grew up with. But anyway, I'm rambling, dude. This is your
Okay.
show. You got to
Oh,
cut
good.
me off. You
Nope,
know,
I don't do
I,
that.
I'll bring the bat on Reddit, but you got to bring the bat here on your show.
Well, first,
Jason, man, dial
well,
it down. Give
I
it,
always tell people, I said, what ticks me off about a lot of podcasts out there is that the host wants to make it about themselves and not about the guest. And so on my program, my guests do 80% of the talking because I really feel it's important that we hear your voices. I love what we're doing with this channel. We've been referenced in academic papers and in books. These interviews are cited on Wikipedia, like the Book of Mormon, Richard Bushman, Lindsay Hansen Park. These people, you'll find references to our channel. So we're making a contribution, but it's not me, it's my guests, and it's the stories that we're telling. And when they write the history of early 21st century Mormonism, they're probably going to have a chapter about the ex-Mormon Reddit. And so
right.
I feel like it's important that we have these real-time conversations about some of the people who are the stewards, the people that were there from the beginning. And I want to, just because of the historical aspect of this, so it's right around the time that Reddit's getting started. what was it like for you to first start engaging on Reddit? And what has it been like for there to be almost from the beginning and to see what it's become now? I mean, just maybe just kind of give us an overall kind of overview of your journey in the ex-Mormon Reddit during this period of time for like 15 years or so.
Well, it was a fairly easy transition just because I'm already coming from, I mean, because of Prop 8, I was already deep into like trying to mine the Mormon, you know, discussion boards and all of that to figure out what was going on. I mean during Prop 8, I'm political. Just I'll be upfront. Like I've, pretty much going back to my early 20s, there are a lot of Democratic campaigns that I've been involved in, just personally doing some research and getting out and, doing some things, whatever interests me. Prop 8 definitely came on my radar. So I was blogging for a California political blog that gets
Okay.
you, well, it gets you fairly close to people who are sitting in the room having discussions about strategy on Prop 8. I mean,
Mhm.
that's, what happened with that is you're sitting in the room with people who are, have the ears of certain Democratic political operators in San Francisco and LA. And so you have these conversations that they're blogging, but they're also fairly, and my whole thing was, guys, you don't understand the nature of the Mormon ground game. There's a huge ground game that you're going to be completely taken by surprise. It's the phone banks, it's the organization. There's a whole operational thing you don't understand. Quinn Monson, if that name rings a bell, he wrote a paper together with the guy from shoot, is he over at Duke or Notre Dame? Anyway, they wrote a paper on dry kindling, and they said the political profile of your average rank and file Mormon is that if you give them a cause to go after under the direction of the first presidency, they are dry kindling. You will see the mobilization of a political operation like you've never seen before. And that's what happened with Prop 8. And I was trying to tell these guys, you're missing the boat. And we all know that, frankly, the No on 8 campaign had its own operational. We lost, and we lost because you had a lot of, I'm just going to be straight with you here, Steve. You had a lot of Sacramento um, entrenched, mainly male gay lobbyists who did not want to upset the apple cart by going too hard on the campaign. And so a lot of the pushback that needed to happen to be able to win that campaign, we had to dial it back, you know. So anyway, because the Mormon storyline is not something you can really tell without looking like you're someone who is casting shade on a religion. Does that make
Mhm.
any sense?
Right, right.
We knew the Mormon machine was being mobilized, but you can't really go out and run ads and say, at least mainstream operatives can't go out and run ads and say, oh, by the way, this is funded by the Mormons. Because that looks like anti-religious bigotry,
Yep, yep.
right? You can't do that, And so I'm stuck in, some of us are stuck in the position. You've got to get that narrative out there some other way. I mean, the way it ended up playing out is that story got told in the courts. All right. So we lost. And then as this went through, first it was Perry v. Schwarzenegger, and that becomes Obergefell. So from that movement from the state, from Perry v. Schwarzenegger up to the Supreme Court case, then the whole story of the Mormon involvement gets told. And there's a point here. You were talking about how you become sort of this archival resource for things that are
Mhm.
happening,
Mhm.
right? To me personally, the Ex-Mormon Subreddit and a lot of what I do is about documenting things that have happened, things that are happening, and making sure that this gets put into the public record. Because one thing about the LDS institutional approach is they love memory holes. They have a lot of money and they have a lot of ability to deep six narratives that run counter to their public presentation of themselves. And at this point, they would love to run away from the idea that they were massive funders of Prop 8. But they can't. They can't because certain people in this world put a lot of time into making sure that that record was documented. And I'm just saying that's why I love, any kind of book review show, anything that talks about people who are writing books, who are
Yep.
documenting the things that are happening in this world in a way that has some permanence. It's important because institutions like the LDS Church will use their influence to rewrite historical narratives. It's an ongoing retcon. You look at the history of the LDS Church since its founding, it has been an ongoing retcon, And when Nelson talks about, oh, we have an ongoing restoration, what is the corollary to an ongoing restoration? It's an ongoing apostasy. They're running away. Stephen, making sense?
Yeah. I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? But so for some of us in this world, part of what we're picking up is, as ex-Mormons, is documenting just this whole passage, the arc and the passage of time and things that happened. Prop 8 happened. Somebody had to document it. I mean, some of us helped document what was going on in terms of the LDS machinations behind the scene. I'll give a shout out to Fred Karger. I mean, that's a buddy of mine. He went to town and he got it down. Sasha Isenberg over at UCLA wrote the definitive 900-page history of the fight for marriage equality in this country and got to draw on some of the work that we did. And at the end of the day, nobody's going to care about this. Nobody listening here cares about that little piece, but I care,
Mm-hmm.
Because it documents the work that people did to make sure that institutions like the LDS Church don't just run away from a story.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, now that we're like 15 years into Reddit and the Exmo Reddit and everything like that, where do you see this going? Like what does Reddit look like 5, 10 years from now?
Well, I hate to be a downer.
Okay.
I hate to be a downer, but the terminus for all of this, what you do, what I do, all of this, I mean, the terminus is irrelevance. Because, and I hate to break it to you, I mean, I don't, that sounds snarky, but from my point of view, the greatest fear the brethren have is irrelevance. And that is what is on the menu for the LDS Church, is irrelevance. And so, as far, my take on where the Exmo subreddit is now, it's probably peaked.
Okay.
It will continue to have utility for the people that use it. It will continue to have utility for what it offers its users. But in terms of becoming some even larger cultural phenomenon, those years are behind us. We're literally in the trajectory now where Mormonism is facing a demographic winter. In terms of, just statistically, it's the Mormon population in the US particularly is facing a demographic winter. They're just facing irrelevance. That's the inevitability of all of this, and so that's why I think a lot of us, we've been making hay while the sun shines.
Okay.
And I don't, there's no long-term, objective here.
So for you, I'm just curious, like what is your motivation to do what you do? What keeps you going I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. What are you trying to accomplish?
I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot of threads there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I came back from my mission and I went through years of my BYU friends coming out of the closet, for example, and seeing the utter pointless pain that they were going through because they're great guys and they're beating themselves up over what? So there has long been this simmering resentment of what my generation, my friends at BYU went through coming home from missions and then realizing, oh, I'm actually gay and I need to navigate this, and how not fun that all was. and how pusillanimous the society tends to be around that, and can't just call it out and say, God damn it, quit treating people, denigrating people, forcing them into this kind of self-torture. Pisses me off. Show some courage. Stand up for your friends. This institution has treated my friends like shit. So that's one of them. Okay, I'm going to dial it down. But that's Steve. I mean, that I'm going to dial it down. But that's when you've gone through that experience of sitting around in dorm rooms with your friends who are grappling with this stuff, and you see the pain that they're going through, it doesn't make you happy. And it unsettles something in you.
Hmm.
So that's a large part of it, you know.
Fascinating. You have empathy for other people and what they were going through, and you saw the pain that they were going through, and just you wanted to. It's interesting to be motivated that way on behalf of your friends.
But I mean, but I think that because I think that dovetails with, okay, so here we go with the whole credentialist thing, right? But there was a generation of undergrads in the late 80s and the early 90s who were going to something that was called the honor symposiums. We were honor students. We were basically, I went to BYU on scholarship. We were basically people who went to BYU with the understanding, you know, we're at the Mazer building. So I'm shouting out to people who probably know this history of you're at BYU on academic scholarships, you get routed into what are called these honors symposia. And really, hey, there we go. But really some great professors, and you're surrounded by these really crackerjack smart Mormon kids at BYU, right? And we were selected to be in those symposia. I mean, we come from fairly, anyway, our backgrounds were all, we performed well in school. How to say this? I'm straight, but the anti-intellectual strain in Mormonism pissed me off in ways that maybe gave me some empathy for my LGBT friends, because my experience at BYU is I want to talk about how absolutely pathetic the BYU trustees are. You look at the board, you look at the trustees, and they wouldn't, you know, they would call them regents. I think at most, like at Baylor or other places, like, hey, let's look at our regents. You know, who are the regents at Baylor? You know, and it's all there on the About Baylor page, and you see, you know, who's running the university. You know, and Baylor's a fairly freaking conservative, you know, operation. And you look at their regents, and it's amazing. Men, women, this whole, you know, collection of people giving insights from various perspectives. And then you go to the board of trustees for BYU. Holy cow, what a train wreck. And so, you know, I'm at BYU in the wake of Eugene England getting his, you know, what respect was shown to Eugene England? How was he treated by my church? How did my church treat Eugene England, who was one of the most decent human beings to ever walk the face of the earth? And this is how he gets treated? So, I mean, there's two things with me that I get angry about. I don't like people who denigrate other people on the basis of their sexual orientation or you know, their gender identity, the color of their skin. That garbage, tired of it. And this country's had too much of it for years now. And then the other thing is, here we go. It's the anti-intellectualism. And if we want to get back to the Ex-Mormon Sub-Reddit, I think the only thing that concerns me now, probably, because we knew we had to scale it up, right? But when you scale anything up in this online world, what are you going to get? You're going to get a more anti-intellectual snarkiness that comes into play. People who are too lazy to follow a link. People who want to make jokes about, like, oh, can you, like, TLDR, too long didn't read that content for me? You know, can you put this in a package that I can sit around in a basement like this and just get my 2-minute, like, dopamine hit? So that's my greatest fear for the Ex-Mormon subreddit, is that eventually it's just going to be left with a bunch of people who are not invested in having thoughtful conversations. They're invested in the fact that it's an easy platform that other people built for them, and they get to parade whatever snarky attitudes, you know, pop into their heads that gives them a moment's glory of anonymous fun. And that's okay. That's all good. That's fine. I mean, I'm a huge fan of selfies. I'm a huge fan of all the fun stuff that happens. But there is, the more you scale up a project like this, there's going to be an undertow of anti-intellectual. Oh, you think you're so smart because you're trying to bring good content into a forum of this size.
I'm just curious because I'm really not sure even how Reddit works. And you have 300,000 members, and I know that when you're scrolling on Reddit, there's promoted materials. I'm just curious, do you guys get advertising revenue or anything, or how did so?
If I ever found out that there was money changing hands with the mods or any of that going on, it would be the thing would blow up because that is exactly the ethos that we oppose. The
Okay,
ethos is no money exchanges hands. It's all volunteer. Yeah, so there's none of that going on. I
good.
mean,
Okay, just was wondering. Okay,
yeah, there is none of that, and there should be no incentives ever given to a mod at Exmo to ever privilege content. That's a deal breaker. If I ever heard that anybody was getting incentivized to make certain decisions, moderating things at the Exmo subreddit, that would make it into the trip because
okay,
this.
good to
Um,
know.
yeah, I think the other thing you were asking about, Senior, and it's an interesting question in terms of the subscriber count. Frankly, the subscriber count is kind of irrelevant at this point.
Hmm.
I mean, the thing that keeps a community like that going, look at the number of posts per day, look at the number of comments per day. It's that churn that, signals whether or not a community is actually healthy and active and vibrant. I mean, the Exmo thing's been there for 15 years now, so they've got a legacy sort of basis of 300,000 subscribers, right? And honestly, people who would wander into that subreddit may or may not even choose to subscribe. You were a lurker for years.
Yeah.
Whether or not you subscribe is fairly inconsequential to your experience of,
Hmm.
of the forum. What really matters is that churn, because let's be honest, like what's the fun part of the Exmo subreddit? It's the fact that every day, day in, day out, you can scroll. And there are literally hundreds of posts going up so quickly that nobody can keep up with the fire hose of content that is coming in. And that's what makes it fun. It's literally a fire hose. And good luck to it. Cracks me up when I see like some of the fresher Exmos on there going like, oh, did you hear about the SCMC, the strengthening, all of this?
Yeah.
Do you understand how we have completely out the scale we've achieved is so far beyond anything the SCMC, which was basically an antiquated 1980s newspaper clipping service that was used to like, pester outlier apostate voices back in the day. They have nothing to counter this. There's no SCMC in the church office building that has anything like the footprint we have. Give me a break. But it's fun that they enjoy the idea that there's this big brother, sort of like watching over. But let's be honest. I mean, the Exmo subreddit is has so much more traffic than 99% of LDS projects on the internet now. It's a completely, I mean, it's an asymmetrical game at this point.
So often it's interesting where we'll have people say, well, I been here for a few years. I want to thank everybody for in your time, and I really enjoyed scrolling and reading and contributing to this, but it's time for me to move on.
Mhm.
Like I'm done with this phase of my life. You'll get that now and then from people.
How does that make you feel?
Well, I was gonna well, I I think for some people, the ex-Mormon Reddit, for people who've experienced trauma and they're going through these terrible
Mhm.
times, that's a community that that's familiar, that people understand, like, hey, we get you. We don't have to explain yourself here. We just get you where you're at. And for some people, I think they feel like they've been there, they've been in that community, the community has served them well, and now it's time for them to move on, and they're healed in that part of their life, and they just want to kind of move on with life and maybe not think about Mormonism ever again. And I guess my question to you is, would we ever see something like that from Chino Blanco?
Well, I mean, the thing is what you're describing, and this is the liminal aspect. I mean, the Expo subreddit is a liminal space in a sense. Like you have people come in, they do their thing, and then they
And
move
then,
on.
yep.
To my mind, that's the most beautiful feature of that particular community, because that is exactly, and I don't want to speak for the other mods or the people who started this project, but to my mind, and I think to our minds, the most beautiful thing that could happen is that you have this liminal space where people come in, they process, and they move on, and they don't think about Mormonism again because they had a chance to vent and get it out and deal with it and process it, and they can move on with their lives and spend time with their kids, pick up new hobbies, go out and touch grass, enjoy the world, and they move on. And that is to me, it's one of the healthiest aspects of that forum. And I think and I appreciate you bringing it up, because I think it's, an underrated observation that we've created a community there that people can come into, hang out, and leave. And have you noticed, and I'm going to see if this works again. I'm going to do this. Can I get some celebratory sort of graph? No. See, when you need it, it's not
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But do you understand the sense? Because that's the sense that every time I see those posts in the Exmo subreddit, and people are like, hey, you know what? It's been a fun 2 years. Thank you for the fish. I'm out of here. Everybody's like, high five, good
Yeah.
for you.
Well,
That,
and you know what? I have to tell you, it served that purpose for me when I because you have to understand, like I understand what it's like to lose one's faith and to been hurt by my faith community and to suffer PTSD and lifelong depression. Being a gay man in an evangelical world is very difficult. Okay. And so for me, the ex-Mormon Reddit was familiar enough. There's a lot of similarities between the evangelical world and the Mormon world. And so it was actually very therapeutic for me in that sense. It was helping me. I mean, I was just there just to read and not contribute anything, but it was something that was, I thought, beneficial to. So it actually, in many ways, I don't even think about it anymore, but in many ways it was probably helpful for me in my well-being during that time.
yeah. And and just kind of circling back, maybe, something I would say is that, and this, so I'm going to go away from the rah stuff for a little bit, the cheerleading, and talk about maybe, well, so what are some of the constraints there?
Yeah.
I would say that one of the constraints is that any kind of internet forum, in a sense, becomes a consensus seeking missile. If you see how those threads work and how Reddit works and online communities tend to work, almost every conversation becomes, because of the human psyche and how we're social animals, and that we're primates, and we're consensus seeking people, right? You look at the way the primate brain works. You put us in a group, we're always going to be looking around, casting our eyes around, keeping our ears open. It's like, who's leading this? Who's the alpha voice? Who's creating this consensus? And are we like, that's how we operate as human beings, our social psychology, right? And that's what happens with any forum. And so I would say with the Exmo, right, it's just you're never going to get outside of this sort of like sort of the political bent. You're like sort of the mood and the bent and sort of the overarching, flavor of the place. That's kind of baked in at this point. And so just have to accept that. I mean, I don't think there's nothing I can do about it. There's nothing anyone can do about that. I mean, you are not going to go into the Exmo subreddit and say, hey, I want to have an open-ended discussion about, Exmo libertarian politics. You will get your ass handed to you on a plate by some very, not happy people. Are like, there are other places to do that. If that's the forum you want, go build it somewhere else. And I have to say, like, it is not within my power to say, oh, we're going to create a subsection of the Exmo thing where, these sort of like, oh, I feel unheard as an Exmo because, I'm from, I'm rolling coal, but I'm still Exmo and I want to, represent that point of view. It ain't going to happen. The Exmo subreddit is pretty much, there is a fairly, there's the Overton window of acceptable debate within that subreddit is what it is, and that's not going to change.
Hmm.
That's one of the constraints, I would say. Whether you disagree with it or not, I think that's just a hard reality.
Okay. Okay.
And I do think it is a place that you can participate, and if you want to have certain other kinds of discussions, you have to move on to other forums for it to happen in a successful way.
Okay. I'm really glad we're having this conversation today.
No,
I
it's
think
just fun. I
it's
mean, but it is what it is. Like, there are certain kinds of conversations that are not going to succeed on that platform. That's neither a plus or a minus. It just is what it
it
is.
is what it is. Yeah, it's that.
What it is
Yeah.
in terms of,
Yeah.
the demographics that you're looking at with that particular group.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation. I just want to thank you so much for coming on the program. You and I, we spar now and then. But you know what? You look me right in the eyes and we have conversation, and that's always greatly appreciated. And
Oh,
I
yeah,
honestly,
yeah.
I don't mind criticism as long as it's constructive. And I do feel like you're you're looking out for the best interests of the community. And I want to honor the work that you've been doing in trying to build a community, because for a lot of people who leave their group, like me being out of evangelicalism for 20 years, it's really important that we have these communities for people, have these safe spaces and places that they can be themselves and have these conversations.
Yeah, and I appreciate this. And I mean, just to bring it maybe around to the Sunstone thing.
Yeah,
That's why I go back to Sunstone every 10 or 12 years, though, is
just to check the
because
temperature.
I don't need to see them every day. I don't
Uh-huh.
even I don't even need to see them every summer, but there are some of my people
Mhm.
who are there, and it feels like kind of coming home and just touching base with people who understand the BYU experience, the mission experience, the Mormon experience, and just being able to circle back and have that. But then I will go to Sunstone this summer and I will probably not be back for another decade, right? Because that's the beauty of it. But that's why props, so if you want to give me props for whatever I contributed to the Ex-Mormon subreddit thing, that's fine. But I mean, that's the props I have to Lindsay and the people who organize things like these symposia, is they're creating, and that's why I give props to Carol, who runs the Main Street Plaza blog. It's a group blog. She creates a platform for people to come together and to share their voices together. And it just, it's nice.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you've made this broadened out the conversation to bring in all these other voices and other people. I think that
Sucks that you're not a jerk, Steve, because I can't get mad at you. That's the thing, it could be fun to really, have a doozy of an interview, but you're
I
so
got
fucking, you know.
I love it. Well, I'm really excited. So folks, oh, by the way, tell them when is what day and what time is the is going to be the your panel discussion at Sunstone.
So let's see what is. I'm gonna see if I get this right. Thursday, August 1st. That evening is Leia's, like, sort of like, Eccles Miller, I think is what it is, right? Is that the free one? I mean, that's what
Uh-huh.
the plug I always give. Like, regardless, there is a free lecture
Yep.
that kicks this thing off. And, like, man, why you wouldn't want to see Leia talk about all of the research that she's done into Lori Vallow and all of Chad Daybell and all of that. I mean, just really interesting. That whole intersection with the true crime world with Mormonism. I mean, it's like boom, very interesting. But yeah, so it's what, August 2nd and August 3rd are basically the 2 days, the
Hmm.
Friday and the Saturday.
Yep.
There we go.
Of course.
Yeah. But yeah, it's Thursday and Friday, and it's just literally, if you go to sunstone.org and you look at that schedule, um, I I think it's a fairly amazing roundup. There's certainly a lot of people that I've never met who have been participating in the online conversations that I'm looking forward to just,
Yeah. That's what I
telling.
love. That's what I love. Not this year, but last year, since I started this channel, I get out to Utah about every 3 months or so, and it's great to meet the people face to face. And the first Sunstone I went to, oh my gosh, I was amazed at the amount of people who would just come out of. They would literally just somebody would just walk right up to me, and it's so interesting. It was almost the same thing, and I get emails that are very similar, and it's often a middle-aged woman will walk up to me, and they'll be like, "A year and a half ago, my shelf broke. And I'm still putting the pieces back together in my life.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's a God or not, but you give me hope that maybe I could believe again. Not that I'm trying to proselytize. And I hear that kind of thing from people. And so I recognize, when I turn on the camera and film, I'm just doing an interview with people. I get emails just today from somebody, who appreciates the work we do. So it's nice to be able to meet the people and look them in the eyes, give them a hug, give them a fist pump. And so I hope I hope you get a lot of hugs and fist pumps while you're out there, my friend.
I'm sure I will. Hey, thank you so much. Just, by the way, I noticed that little pitch at the end there, though. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Love it.
Isn't
All
that
right.
the nice thing? Isn't that the nice thing? We can walk away from this Exmo Reddit and believe whatever we want
Yeah.
and embrace whatever life we want. And
Yep.
nobody gets to, like, tell you what you can or cannot do or believe as an ex-Mormon.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true. So Folks, I just want to, first of all, thank you, homie, for coming on the show today. Glad to finally get you on the program, man. I've been trying to get you on for a while, so I'm glad you're able to do this. And maybe we'll have you back on in 12 years. That sound about right?
That's, well, that would be a beautiful eventuality for both of us,
I think so too. It'd be great
right?
if we're still
Down to
both
12
around.
years is a gift.
That's very true. So, folks, leave your comments. For those of you who are in this the Ex-Mormon subreddit, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your comments in the Reddit as well. It was a great conversation. I think you learned a lot. I think it was really good to have document the history of the origins of the Ex-Mormon Reddit. These are important conversations we're having. The impact that it's had over the course of the last 15 years has been huge, no question about it. So I'm gonna have links in the description to everything we talked about. Also, for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, we do have links, mormonbookreviews.com, as well as Patreon, PayPal, and Venmo. Couldn't do this without you. Really do greatly appreciate you. Thanks again, my friend, for coming on the show today.
Thank you to everyone who promotes and supports authors and books.
Okay,
You have my thumbs up.
great. Thank you. So remember, the most important thing is this, folks. Remember, all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.